got a message. Oh. No more segregation, no matter the nation. We coming together, lifting up the Father, yeah. With a smiling face, oh. We giving him praise, oh. Every creed and race, oh. No matter the place, oh. No people that won't we stop. United we
Good evening and welcome to the Lots Drawn. This is a podcast where we discuss several topics for the last 2 weeks. Today, this is the third week. We discuss and we're on the topic, what is Soca? We heard from Sheldon Blackman in the first week. Second week, we heard from Mike Bootman. And today, I'm really glad to have two distinguished guests with me to further discuss this issue of what is Soca. Today, let me welcome Dr. Keela Francis, who is the assistant professor in the Masters of Arts and Carnival Studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, better known, of course, as UTT. And then my fellow brother, Cultural Studies PhD candidate, he's also an entertainer, promoter, MC. I don't know how many hats he wears. Omari Ashby. And so today we're going to really get down and talk a little bit more about what is Soca, relationship to Carnival. We'll talk a bit about the influence. Earlier we had a discussion of the Black Power movement and also a bit on what's happening with Soca as it develops and morphs. So first, let me play a clip from Sheldon to kind of jumpstart us. All right. Let me just play a short clip from Sheldon.
John, which one are we looking at today first?
Right. The one where he talks about Soca, about his father being influenced.
That's the origin.
Yes, the origin.
Okay, let's try that one.
The first spelling of the song and the brand was Sokah.
Yes.
Which was a blending of the East Indian, from what he says, it's a blending of the ka from the East Indian element and with calypso and to form soca, right? And then a journalist, I can't remember the name of the journalist at the moment, from the Bomb or the Punch, or one of those, spelled it Soca. And if you look from it, you would see that he of himself after that spelled it Soca, and then he went back to spelling it Sokah. So it had this kind of two spelling of the word, but the original content of the song and the blend was to counteract actually the whole influence of soul music in the because it was just American soul music was even on that album, and that's why.
All right, so Dr. Francis, I will allow you to jump off first and give some commentary here.
I don't want to sound controversial.
No, not on Lots Drawn.
But there are myriad stories, partly because soca is a community or a communally based or derived sound. It grew out of experimentation with calypso and soul, funk, disco, high life, and then a little bit Afrobeat. All these things were milling in the air between 68 thereabouts into 74 thereabouts. And you would find that there was a lot of experimentation. We had something called disco reggae. It was actually I think it was Kalyan. They had a song disco reggae is really called a soca. So there was a lot of experimentation. KNH Studios, and I was always getting the letters wrong. That's my dyslexia. They were, according to Robin Imamshah, they were experimenting with what they call a recording protocol, and they called it Southern Caribbean Recording Protocol. And so they claim the term soca comes from that, SOCA, Southern Caribbean. And they based that primarily on the bass pan and how they were trying to get that, how to record that level of bass in the studio. So that was experimentation in there. And a lot of the producers, early producers of soca tracks, were working in that studio at the time. I already mentioned Imam Shah. Dakota was working in there, Pelham God, and all these people, they were milling about. Maestro was recording there. Um, Shadow would record there. So during this time, all that experimentation was fomenting into the genre. So that by 1980, the tune becomes solid with songs like Soca Baptist.
Yep.
And that explodes. One of the one of the reasons, and I like to put Soca Baptist there, one of the reasons because it was during the time of Black Power, and so it was a heightened sense of Pan Africanism, and they started to question, why do we only focus on lyrics in calypso? Why don't we focus on the music as well? And I'm pulling that from Lovelace's essay on it. Um, and so they looked around. And what's interesting about soul and funk, especially, is that these were sounds that came out of struggle. So soul comes out of the gospel
Yep.
tradition, comes out of the freedom songs that they were singing in the 50s and 60s. So, when it comes out of the Sam Cooke tradition, and then when Sam Cooke records um, A Change Is Gonna Come, you could look at that as a very early soul music. And so soul took on that kind of social consciousness. And of course, we reached the heights with people like Marvin Gaye and what's going on. So soul music became a way to express that pain and frustration, but also that optimism. And I think we resonated with that as we were resonating with the Black Power movement, and really the frustration that we independent, but we're not really seeing the change we expected to see. Funk is more militant, and if you listen to, I would say one of the peak of funk and soca would be Shadow's um So Sweet. I might be misnaming the album, from I think it's 80 or 82, somewhere around there, which is actually listed as one of the best funk albums ever. Um, but
Wow.
the
I
line
didn't even
is
know
so
that.
blue. Huh? You didn't
I
know?
didn't
Yeah,
even know that that was one of the best funk albums. Wow.
best funk albums.
Really?
Um, we will listen to it and say that's soca from the
Right.
70s, but
Yeah.
if you listen to it carefully, it is also funk. It's funk, right? Let's like the track "Let's Get Together," for example, is funk. I mean, I would say let Bootsy Collins play that, and he would be impressed by the bass lines in "Let's Get Together." It's a real funk, but it's also soca. Um, and before I get too headspacey, and I hope I'm not jumping all over the place,
No,
but
no, no. You go with the flow. Omari will jump off that. Go ahead.
it brings up. I think one of the problems we have with defining soca is we don't understand the process of how it came to be, and it's called. I call it. The term could be called cultural authentication. It's 3 steps. I break it down in 3 steps. Some people break it down in four. But first is adoption, then adaptation, and then assimilation. So right before we started calling it SOCA or SOKAH or
Right.
however you want to spell it, you had people taking that disco rhythm, right, and making Trinidad disco. So that was adoption. We heard disco, we liked it. We heard funk, we liked it. Reggae and all these things, and we started doing that.
Right.
And then the second phase, when you get to people like Maestro and Disco Daddy, Maestro and Nelson, I call it Nelson
Yeah.
Disco Daddy,
Disco Daddy. Yeah.
but he was a Disco Daddy.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
is, you get it, he is the Disco Daddy, right? You start to hear a Trinidadian twist to this disco. It's not, I can't say it's straight disco, I can hear it, but we're doing something else with it. Nappy Myers did that too
Yeah.
with the Sudiwachang music. It did a lot different. He took that disco and he started making it Trinidadian. So it wasn't disco by Trinidadians, it was Trinidadian disco. And then the third phase is assimilation, where unless you really know what you're listening for, you can't necessarily say pinpoint, okay, well that's that disco it's Trinidadian, but it has those elements of disco in it underneath it kind of coming through. And Soca went through that. Soca is still going through that because Soca is far more experimental. I know we were, I think before we came on air, we were talking about soca is still evolving, and popular music will always grow, shift, change, and that's not a problem.
Now,
Um,
I want to stick a pin there, Doc, because I want to
uh,
come right back to you on that point.
mm,
I want to go down that particular hole. Let me, Omari, you give me your take on the soca discussion, on the soca narrative that we're trying to develop here.
Well, I usually say, like most things, um, in the wider world, we like neat and very easy to tell stories. So we want somebody who invented this. We want somebody who came up with this, and it has to be that singular person. And we know life never works like that. Even with the story of Steel Pan, you'll hear Spree Simon, but talk to anybody who was a little more west of Port of Spain, they would have heard about experimentation down there. So there's always something in the air. And I know that to be true because of my experience. People mark Kindred as the start of that second wave of rap, so that 90s wave. But I could tell you, bubbling all around were a lot of young people with the same ideas doing very similar things. We were the first to record and be known, but to say that Kindred would have been the first would be kind of erroneous because there was a general feeling and movement where me, Ozzy, Rubadiri, all of us would be meeting in UE. It would have a whole lot of people, and then people who would even directly connected, people down in South and people in Shogunas, and there was just an energy in that permeates the space that allows a kind of similar creativity to happen. I suspect that is what would have been happening because you can't say soca and not say Nelson singing the Garrett Bonks that was probably in 1968 or something. You can't say soca and not talk about King Wellington maybe in 69 or 70. You can't say soca and not talk about Shadow and the fact that he took it away from the walking bass line to give soca an actual bass line. I mean, you really cannot talk about that development and ignore the people who Doc mentioned in the studio, all the musicians, all the producers, all the artists. You can't separate it from that. On my journey, I always like to start with the griot and the jolly. You know what I mean? And I think if you start from there, if you start from that West African sensibility, or even that Senegambia space, you see where that development would have made the journey across the Middle Passage and shown itself in so many different ways. One of the things that Kindred popularized was the Jolly Man, and everybody used to say, well, Omari was the Jolly Man. They never hear about the Jolly Man. Where's the Jolly Man? And the Jolly would have been that storehouse of knowledge, that persona in West Africa that would have been carrying the stories of the tribe, that would have been doing the music, and just like Trinis like to do, everything in Trinidad is a man. And you don't ever have the gardener, you're the gardener man, right? You don't ever have the man who's selling lolly, you're the lolly man. So for me, I say, well, we can't just have the jolly, we must have a jolly man, right? And so that's idea is the same thing that I would apply to soca, where we take what we see and we understand it, we internalize it, and then we give it back to you as a Trinidadian something. And I suspect that is where the soca and rightfully Dr. Francis would have said that idea of that African influence, that Pan-African feel. How do you take away deduction from soca? How do you separate that idea, that driving force, that and so one of the things that we have to recognize is that we should not look for that single story. That single story is dangerous because it again, nothing ever happens without something happening before. Somebody might have passed and hear a piece of a beat, say, wait, I like that portion, and he gone with that, and then bring it back while the person's still working on the beat that they was working on. So things happen like that all the time. And so we have to bring recognition to all those players who would have worked on it. I mentioned. Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm glad, and I'm glad that we had this. We are having this discourse because I think one of the things we try to keep saying is the fact that I liked how Mike made the point about different people in different spaces were all contributing, different things were happening, and so it's not definitively is Rash or T.I. that did this. Some say Robin Imansha with La La Le, TTT. I mean, you have all kinds of theories out there, but I like where we are going. Now, Dr. Francis, I want you to comment on the fact that you would recall we used to have a certain kind of beat about the calypso. At first, yes, we had the kick, and then we had the hi-hats doing a fancy thing, solidly as calypso. And then with the soca, we had in 1986, Rudder came in with a brand new ba-doop doop, ba-doop doop, and it changed. And then a number of persons took that over. And then we saw the influence of reggae, dancehall on the music because we opened some of the radio and all that. And so we saw some more changes again. Mike spoke a lot about instrumentation, the fact that the kinds of instruments that were used also helped to define the music over time. So let me just hear a bit on that because it is still evolving, but how do we say, like how we would say reggae is on 2 and 4, where there's ska, where there's dancehall, rock steady, it remains a certain form. So that even with the salsa, salsa jazz, salsa, all kind of thing, but that bap, 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 bap sits inside. How do you see that in terms of us defining soca with a kind of pedagogy that says this is it as a fundamental?
Let me say things and contradict myself in a kind of way.
That's all right.
Right? It's very. I will start with Shadow quote. In 1977, Shadow say Calypso soca is the same duduk. Right? And I've interpreted that duduk to mean is the same adoption. Right? And people don't realize Calypso, early soca, and it comes in waves in soca, so it's harder sometimes to pinpoint. If you strip away everything from the Calypso recordings and you pull adoption, you could pull adoption. I don't care what Calypso is, you could pull adoption. And that is at the heartbeat of it. A lot of soca, you could, when you strip away, you could pull adoption. And Trinidad has a specific style of adoption. Barbados has a different style of adoption. So when you strip, when you do the adoption to a Bajan soca, for example, you could pull adoption. It's not going to be exactly like our adoption. To be frank, every Black Atlantic society have a version adoption. I remember blowing my friend's mind when I explained to her, that thing Black preachers do, where they I say, that's adoption. And she's like, oh my God. It's like, yes. So we have variations of, and it comes through in our music. And to me, really, that's how we connect, right? And as you talk about David Rudder, when David Rudder saying Ile is all the same thing. Because that at the core of that samba is a kind of adoption that we would pick up, and that's what appeals to us. And so, like I said, it comes in waves. So from 70s and 80s, that adoption was strong. Mid 90s, the adoption kind of dips. And that is with the influx of all those electronic, right? Um, right now, groovy soca to me is morphing into what I like to call Caribbean pop, because sometimes you don't hear the adoption in it at all. But from whatever iteration, what you used to hear the core of soca was adoption. If you strip away everything, um, Robin E. Mancher said they call it four on the floor, and not a drummer. As play guitar every once in a while, so I don't ever claim to be able to explain things like a musician. I go to go there, right? But four on the floor, so that duh, duh, duh. If you notice adoption, the adoption, the four on the floor is in it. When we add the syncopation, that is what soca does be, right? That adoption syncopation, and so it comes sometimes the producer, now that we're talking about rhythm soca, because now we in, well, rhythm soca since 2003, somewhere around there to now, everyone on a rhythm. Sometimes the rhythm understand option, and that option is the, and that rhythm becomes the sound of the year, kind of like, and I do it through observation as well, because people don't know, realize they listen to adoption, they don't know, but it's take them. So when R&R rhythm came out, for example, I watched, yeah, there was that I know Sonny Bling was playing the the A dollar sign, right? But you see how he let go? That's because that's adoption. Which I feel like a jumping, but that is why we could connect soca to the Lego Calypso. It was called the Lego Calypso for a very specific reason. You were supposed to Lego, right? And if you listen to it, the movement, the call and response in that song. So there are two types of call and response. You have call and response where it's verbal. So I sing a line and you're supposed to respond. But there's also non-verbal call and response, or body language call and response. The song is telling you to do a certain motion and you do it, right? Um, so the Lego, you actually, and not fully on camera, but your hand spread out, your legs spread out. You might whine, you might not, but you're actually releasing everything. That's the motion. You're releasing everything. Another example, more recent, let's see. MX Prime and Ultimate Extreme song Heat from 2019 is a bongo song. And when you hear the beat, he actually says bongo beat. But when you hear the beat, you want a bongo. But if you don't know what it is, it's calling you to dip down and come back up in the bongo motion. Calypso by Faye and Lions this year is a belly, right? So I find we kind of come in full
Full
circle.
circle. Yeah.
We're starting to go back and pull these folk rhythms with adoption at the core and bringing them out. Not every song, granted, but a lot of the songs that, and I might be biased because these are a lot of the songs that stick with me, but it's because I'm hearing that lineage, that heritage coming through. And you go, but wait now. But you could dance ballet to calypso. Easy, easy, easy. Um, Calypso itself is a composite. So we trying to define soca. We ain't define calypso really either. Let me just see, right? Calypso
Well,
started.
well, from the academic literature, you do have some definitions from people like Roaring Lion and so on, which we now realize definitely could not be true.
No, we would point to people like Attila. Attila had a good book on it, on what calypso is, right? Roller talks about it in
Yeah.
in the Bible, calypso and society. But what I take away from that, and in keeping with the idea that soca did not derive from a single person. When calypso started, calypso was a specific folk form, but the term became the catch-all term for every black
Everything.
folk
Yeah.
form, right? So it started absorbing bongo and belly and um, juba, all the different ring dances started getting absorbed into calypso. So by the time we hit 30s, 40s, what we call in calypso have all these things in it, right? What you see now with a few artists, I find Maria Bola is doing it deliberately. It's what I call, the fancy term is intertextuality. So she's pulling from older, deliberately pulling from older songs, letting you know she pulled from older songs to have it inform the meaning of the song that she's writing now. So with the 2020 Calypso Monarch deliberately pulling from Philip My Dear. Oh, you're supposed to know that's where it come from.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
And
that's
Shadow with Obia.
and she pulled from Shadow with Obia.
Oh, yeah. Mm.
You're supposed to know where it come from, because if you know what the original song is, you realize that Megan My Dear flips the aesthetic of Philip My Dear on its head. So in Philip My Dear, is this big strong black man, and the little white woman, which is not the actual history, but that was Sparrow's remaking of the history, right? And with Megan My Dear, it flips, and then she also flips Congo Man at the same time, right? Because she alludes to Congo Man, right? When you eat black meat, you can't go back. So never eat a white meat yet is Congo Man. So the whole aesthetic gets flipped, and black becomes the beauty, and white almost becomes the savage, right? And so the height of that song then is not just it sound nice and it's funny, but it's doing something very serious. And I'm glad I'm talking to you. You're both in cultural studies, so this not too far fetched
No, no.
for you, right? And so they do that. You're starting to see Ultimate Reject does it a lot too. There's a big quarrel with my friends because Full Extreme samples Soca Boat. Soca Boat? Yes, Soca Boat. Is that is no. I forget which one it sampled. And it split the bass in half, and that was deliberate because they wanted that same kind of feeling, right? Um with a feeling it when they remake the Baron
Yes,
song.
yes, yes.
So I find the
Yeah,
video was quite insulting, but that's another story,
yeah.
right? So we some of the younger generation is looking back at the past and engaging in a conversation with older soca, older calypso, and that's lovely to see. So I'm glad to see that kind of evolution going on. It's bound to happen. This is what
Yeah.
hip hop, you know, in well, still doing. So they looked back at disco, then they looked back at funk, and then they started looking back at jazz even and bringing that. So you had trip hop coming up in the 90s, those kind of things. And this is the natural evolution we want to see in soca, that it starts to recognize itself as a conversation, a body, a heritage of its own, and it's being able to pull from inside and do something new with it. Um, so for me, if you keep the adoption in it, if we recognize the adoption and the core, the beat, so four on the floor, and then we build around the syncopation
Well,
around
that,
that.
that's that maybe we need to expand that conversation, Doc, because that is what I think. No. I'm serious. You know, I'll just throw off the beat a bit. In Tobago, we have the tambourine instrument. And one of the things that started with your own UTT, we had a program when in maybe about 2 years ago, where the percussion department, I forgot his name, two of them came, and we had one from the string department and one from the percussion. And interestingly, what we had started to do, it's just that we couldn't get the funds to get it to continue. Because it suddenly hit us two things. One, the tambourine was becoming an endangered species, and I'm addressing that in another way. That needs to have education and training and all that. But the old players were all dying out, and then we weren't getting the younger players. Then we were moving from the fiddle to the mouth organ, and the mouth organ became more standard than the fiddle. And then the program we started was this. We've got to start looking at the pedagogy. In other words, how do you hold the instrument? Which fingers do you play it with? What pressure do you apply? Is it the inside of your hand? And they started to actually document with the tambourine guys, telling them what to do. Because the idea was at the end of the day, they want to write it in such a way we can offer the program that if you want to learn to play this instrument, play the folk rhythms, experiment otherwise, it's there. It's actually recorded, documented, and so on. That program, I'm still passionate about getting it done. It's the same kind of way I feel about soca because when I was at
Interestingly enough, John, I just want to, before you move away from the tambourine, that is one of the major influences in soca via Shadow.
yes,
Because Shadow's music draws heavily on the tambourine. And you hear it in his melodies and how he approaches rhythm.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I agree with that. Totally agree.
And then, of course, Shadow's influence on soca, I would argue, is the most pervasive of almost any single artist, because when you check how many times people try to draw on that shadow beat, so to speak, or that shadow-esque. So I just linking that back to the idea of the tambourine and the importance of really exploring that in its fullness as part of the foundation of the music of soca, you know?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, Doc, the point I would like you to jump on is, as a form, we are not probably there yet, but can't we develop exactly what you're talking about there? Something that puts us in a place that, hey, this is where the thing, this is what it is in terms of a definitive form, and that everything else jumps up. Because now I know we're still morphing, we're now into neo-soca with voice and the new kind of stuff. You just said something about Caribbean pop, and that kind of just jumped in my head. It was like, oh yeah. I've also heard tropical, they call it tropical, my God, it's slipping me. There's also another name they're trying to call the soca.
Island pop,
Island pop, tropical something, and trying to come up with all these names. And I also say that, I don't know if you remember, Doc, when there was a music in Trinidad called Chut Kaiso Pang, you remember that? It didn't last 2 years.
That different from Chutney Parang?
Yeah, it was Chut Kaiso Pang was a combination of Kaiso, Chutney, Parang. And it actually was a form that they actually said, hey, we calling it that. And somebody experimented, did something, but it never took off. Never took off.
I remember that.
So, but let me be clear. When I call it Caribbean pop, because I don't think it is soca.
It doesn't have the adoption.
It doesn't have the adoption. It's nice
Okay.
pop music, but it doesn't have the adoption. And
That's a big point.
yeah, I keep saying this to people. A lot of people look down on me for saying it. Because including in my Pan-African approach, I do look at our sacred rituals in secular spaces. And a lot of the things that we do, especially our artisans, our performers, come from a sacred space and is a ritual performed in a secular setting. Carnival is a ritual, right? Most of the people jumping up don't know they're inside a ritual. When you tell them it is a ritual, they get, ritual, what can you even take? Right? They don't want to admit it, but we are very hesitant in embracing our African spirituality and how our African spirituality permeates a lot of what we do. And I find that very problematic. Soca, Gordon Rollier, Dr. Rollier calls soca, or at least some soca, ritual soca, right? And he looks at people like Super Blue and David
Yes.
Rudder, and so it speaks volumes, because these are people who pull out, they make the adoption very obvious. When Bahia Girl in '86, Rudder Talks, he did an interview for Calypso Showcase, right? And talks about how he had a vision. You see that adoption breakdown in the middle of the Hegel?
Yeah.
He had a
No, it
vision
did.
of people marching around the red house and that adoption pulling down and things just falling down, right? Power raising and people just coming to a new realization. So that adoption was very deliberate. Soca has the potential to be that kind of rituals liberation, right? And we'd say it in the lyrics all the time. Your head gone, you want to mash it up. What we mashing up? No one has asked what you're mashing up, right? But if we're talking about a ritual space, the idea is that you meet creative and destructive forces at the same time. So what you're mashing up are the structures that keep your ego, your selfhood in check and depressed. That's what you're mashing up. That's what you're breaking away. And in doing that, you come out renewed with creative energy. That's what the ritual is supposed to do. It's a rehumanizing ritual. Soca was a very big part of that. Growing up, for example, when you had I would for me the cutoff is 2005. That's when I started to see a real major shift. Again, this is not proper research. I'm being very biased because I'm basing it on me and my experience.
That's
So
right.
let me just clarify that, please.
Yeah.
Please don't say I say all. No, no, no. Basing it on my experience. There was a point where you hear a song, yeah, touch the bottle, yeah, sniff nothing. You walk in the party sober and nice and normal, and you know how you end up on the ground whining on a man. There were songs like that, right? That you just let go. You don't
That
realize
was
what.
before 2005.
So I mean that was I would say 2005, and then it will bump up and down depending,
Oh, okay.
right? There were songs where I think 2010 was the epitome of this, where you jump because they had nothing else to jump to. I want to call no names and no songs by nobody, but 2010 was kind of a, you're watching Soca Monarch and you're kind of only watching it because you're
Yeah,
supposed to
yeah,
watch it because
yeah.
you're into carnival, that kind of feeling. Um, and then and either so like 2005 I think was Gold Pot Rhythm, Pot of Gold Rhythm. That explode. The rhythm the year after that explode, and then we had a dip, and then they come back and right. Now, if you're not drunk, you don't feel it. Certain songs, certain songs will make you let go no matter what. Like Dizzy Family was so explosive because you're minding your own business. You could be walking on the road minding, you hear family come on,
Yeah.
and all of
Yeah.
a sudden you're whining on a wall. You don't know how you reach there, right? And I say it's from personal experience because I went to school in the States. So there was no carnival, no nothing, no, out. I mean, maybe in the summer, if you're lucky, you stick around for that. I'm on the train. I have my headphones on. A old soca song come on, and I look up and I realize people watching me on the train. And then I look down and I realize I holding
Yeah.
on to a pole, and I walking up on the agency. And I was like, it's not. I didn't drink. I smoke. I even know I'm doing it. The song dictates that your body move in a certain way. That it has that Lego spirit, that adoption that gets you in a space you don't know where you are. And then the songs without adoption, you have to be drunk first.
I want to interject, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things we could very much get to a point in academia where we exploring these things and not looking at the spirit of the thing, right? Our music has always had a purpose. Our music is in service of what we need in that moment, right? So
Mm.
enslaved Africans would have been drawing on what they knew to survive, to be human in a space that didn't want them to be human, right? And every step of the development after the emancipation was proclaimed, then our music had to come for them to access and lift themselves up in a particular way. And every step we always create something that is responding to the energies that our spirit demands, and not spirit singular as the individual, but as a community, right? And you will find that development every step of the way. I always tell people, when you listen to music of a particular year or a particular era, but it is because that is what was demanded. Soca happened in a space of Black power, like Doc said, of all these elements happening, and then look at when the Kiskiri Caravan happened.
Yeah,
right?
I want you to talk about that, by the way.
This is 2 years after the coup, so it is not a coincidence that this bunch of young 19, 18, 20-year-olds had something to say in a particular way, because the space demanded that. They needed to be heard, and some kind of recovery, and so Trinidad is a place. Well, I shouldn't say Trinidad, but we come from a lineage that don't necessarily need a reconciliation hearing to deal with a situation. Let's say, or maybe we do need it, and if we don't get it, we figure out a way to get it. Let me put it that way. And so it will come out in the music, in people saying, so our song was this Trini could flow. Why did we come up with this? Why are we telling people, well, listen, as a Trini, you can do anything, express yourself as yourself, and still mash up a space, a dance, a thing? What was the motivation for that? And so in that time of the 1990, all the things that led to the 1990 coup attempt is what led to that music. All the the imperialism, the neo-colonialism, all those things would have been pouring into us, and the young people of that time would have found themselves in a position of consuming. We would have been consumers of dancehall, hip-hop, all the things that come in at us. And at some point in time, your spirit rejects pure consumerism. Your spirit needs you to be a producer of something. And so we stopped just consuming and say, well, listen, we're going to take this very thing and make it ours, right? Drawing on everything. And my personal experience is one of I came up in a house of soca, of calypso. Up to now, people will be, along with my gray hair, people just think I'm much older than I am, simply because of the kind of calypso I know, the kind of, you understand? Because when I started talking, I was, oh, you know that? We wasn't born then, but I came up in that. So that come into my music, but at the same time, I was listening to Public Enemy, right? At the same time, and so that was in there as well, you know? But I also knew that I needed something to resonate. And let me tell you how creative and that spirit space does work, right? The very first year, we dragged Shell Shock, who was the architect of the music in that era. We dragged him kicking and screaming to do a carnival song called Don't Stop. And that Don't Stop became a hit for all the 35-year-old and under. But as an artist, it disturbed me that I could not get the people over 35 to feel kindred in that particular way. So I started to think. And this is how creativity works. And I said, you know what? They ain't getting away. I said, Shell Shock, give me this. And I started singing the bass line for the F jam for him, right? And we built our song on that F line bass jam, and we hide it inside the song, but everything was built on the architecture of the F jam. And everybody started breakaway to Kindred song that year, not knowing what was the difference between what we did the year before that was only among the 35 and below, and what is happening now that is appealing to this, the cross, and it wasn't, and so it was creative, but it was also me as an artist seeking to increase our reach, you know, and that is often the thought process of a creative person. Yes, we want this thing to be creative, but how can we access something? And in accessing that F jam, I didn't know why I was accessing it. I know this is normally where people just break away. That is I know that. So then I say, well, all right, if that is what works, let me see if I could incorporate that. And what was I doing there? really unconsciously, I was tapping in to a particular energy that permeates this nation, right? And once I plugged into that, then people start to move, and so sometimes in that four on the floor thing is very true. But you know what four on the floor is also true of? House music, right? Four on the floor is also true of all those things. But what really brings us home really is that adoption. And what speaks to adoption? Rapso really says to you that this is the power of the word in the rhythm of the word. So when we see something that is amazing, we don't go, my God, that is really crazy. No, actually, that end of the ball, oh, good, nah, boy. And it is in that side, you see that, oh, good, nah, boy? That is where our music is, right? Oh, good, nah, boy, with that energy. And so that is the building blocks of our thing. So yes, we could do a musical analysis of soca, which is needed, which is needed. But we also have to take into consideration that energy that permeates this space, that is drawn upon whenever we need it, you know. Look at what is happening with what they call the zesting music. This music that the young people doing.
Zest, not really bad.
Right. So they're drawing on something because they have something to say, right? It is almost the same impulse that launched the Kiskeri Caravan. The difference being the music that is around them now is what they're drawing on, you know? And I've often said that if we were to combine that zesting crowd with some people who could then link them back to what is in this space, there is absolutely nothing that will stop that music, because they just emulating a particular kind of thing. But if they tap into what is here just bubbling, that adoption, and you see, one of the things that we tend to ignore, that adoption is ancient. It is ancient. That if you listen to any of Buju Banton song, that preacher that Doc talk about, Buju,
You have that right too.
as well. You hear, and if you hear Buju Banton song and you don't hear him drawing for that breath, you almost miss it. It is the same thing that demands that Super Blue goes, right? It is that kind of, and it is putting something in the space that is needed. One of our songs we recorded, and we always, as Kindred, we would always put adoption in our music, right? Again, we didn't know why. What we knew is that it felt good, and the music demanded it in that moment. There was the year when Minchel did Hallelujah, we did a song called Celebration that was speaking to the voice of the people being the voice of God. And in the middle of that song, we did a adoption breakdown. When I recorded that song, me and Akinde, the other guy that sang with me, when we finished doing that adoption, 1, we did not know we were finished. 2, we did not know where we were. 3, it was almost like if we walk out of the sea. That is how wet we were, everything. And so we looked at one another and wondered what had just happened, because it was real, right? What was coming out of us was real from somewhere that was, we just looked and we knew, and we walked out and we know that was it, right? And so there's that element that happens, that element that we tap into sometimes without knowing. After that, I started to take a better recognition. And what I was drawing on initially was my spiritual Baptist grandmother, the many feasts we went to, the many things. I was drawing on that initially. But then it went beyond just me mimicking what I heard to me imbuing something into the music.
Yeah,
you know? Yeah. And so there has to be room in there for that. That's what is happening there.
Doc, we only have about 12 more minutes, but there's something. Today I read where Crazy said online, and he made a point that right now, post-COVID, a number of the artists are outside, soca artists, having a ball. I know I talk to Sherwin almost every weekend. He's having a ball. Voice is having a great time outside on the US tour and so on. Crazy made a point and he said, well, boy, like Calypsonians, like them fellas, days done, boy. He was telling Erickson Bernard, like we had a kind of, and then Randy said, well, no, you guys have to start learning how to use social media and starting to get popular. But isn't there an issue, and I'm bringing it up, that the calypso that we used to have, there's some gap that's happening between calypso and the soca. I want you to comment on that whole thing. How do we bridge that little gap? Because really and truly, soca for me is calypso, but yeah.
There are two, I would say any calypso arena, there are two camps. There's the camp that says soca is not have nothing to do with calypso, and then they camp, and I suppose it might be by age or not, that soca comes out of calypso. People like Mr. Shaq, for example, is hopscotch back and forth, right? It helps that his brother is also a producer, a soca producer. Actually, I think the first recording I know of Mr. Shaq is singing on Potable Rhythm, right? Which his brother produced. And so the younger people who making a play in calypso, drawing from soca and calypso. I talked about Maria Bola. I think she does that very well as well, and merges the two in a kind of ways, a soca performance sensibility with calypso storytelling,
Good.
right? And that's nice. Um, if you go back 1986, I like to use this one in class a lot. You see, Bahia Girl. Bahia Girl is an example of a song that I could define in three ways. It's soca, it's calypso, and it's samba,
Yes. Correct.
all at the same time.
All at the same time.
Right?
Yep.
All at the same time, which again suggests that soca and calypso are married like that. The problem comes when, from the camp that says soca is young people thing and none of that is not the true calypso, is that we're actually stifling calypso. We're not allowing calypso to evolve as it should naturally. Calypso stays relevant as long as it reflects, as you said, Omar, when it has to reflect what the culture and the society needs, right? When you go to a calypso tent, I go every year. I try to at least hit at least three different ones, right? Stalwart as I am, there's a point in the program when you're just watching you're looking at what I'm going, oh God, man, right? Every song now is 8 minutes long, and they're shouting and preaching at you, or is a drag foot song. It's not necessarily matching the anger or the issues that we want to address or how we want to address it. The last major evolution of calypso was 70s, because we have soca, we have rap, so but calypso itself also changes a lot late 60s into 70s. Different rhythms, different style, music becomes more important, musicality, all that kind of stuff. Right? We move far away from Ray major and Ray minor. We can trace this evolution all the way back. So yeah, you start with the folk form. By the 1920s, you start to hear ragtime influence coming and out. um 1940s with Kitchener, you have Latin jazz coming in and out, that starts to influence, and this is an influence that sticks around. We hear it. By Sparrow time, 1950s, he starts experimenting deliberately with the melody you're singing and the melody of the music. So experimentation has always been part of calypso. So we can't come now and try and differentiate calypso from soca
Correct.
and stagnate calypso's evolution. And that's part of the problem that's going on, right? We can't say calypso sound like this and it must sound like this and it can only sound like this, because it must reflect what the younger people feeling. And some of the younger people who join the fray, they are trying to shape it to sound like them, to express what they, and of course they very rarely make it. Um, when we say make it, they very rarely get a crown, which a lot of people measure as making it, right? But for me, making it is having a serious impact, and I think um, Bola has because the way she does those allusions, she bring her old song in, and it's not just she tiffing from an old song. That old song speaking through the new song.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah.
conversation there. That blows my. That is brilliant. Rudder does it, but if you don't know the songs he referencing, you will not you might not get it, right? Um, I know people watch me crazy when I say, so you see that line in Bahia Girl when you say, had your boy in heaven, had your boy in hell?
Yeah.
So that's referencing a Kitchener song, Our Bernice. And she called him to lie down. She's like, I know what she doing. She had your boy in hell. I'm like, but it's something poetry does. That's a hallmark of poetry. It's a conceit in poetry. It's supposed to show off, look at what I know. And if you know it, then you will
Yeah.
feel it. Right? And so
Rhoda is
she
a
does
master of that
all.
for true.
Huh? Say it again?
He
I
said
said
right.
Rhoda is a master of that for true.
Yeah. So he does it, and he does it in such a way. If you don't know, you're gonna know, right? Maria Bola is doing it. That the song she had for this year, where she was talking about the infamous slap. I want the slap from Nicki Minaj
Mm-hmm.
husband. That whole
Yeah,
controversy,
yeah.
right? And I listened to it, and she's like, "How you gonna slap Iowa?" And she do the hand, but not hand. She did that repetition the same way he
Yes,
did it.
yes,
So,
yes.
and then you go, wait, no. So you start to feel like Iowa in room, that kind of thing. And these are the evolutions you want to see. You want to see both an awareness of what went before and how I could converse with that awareness while I'm reflecting what is going on around me now. Um, but you have older heads who fight that down,
Yes.
and that is so
And
it's
older
really,
judges too, eh?
yeah, you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? Because when you talked about you do a song one year and it's only 35 and under reacted, and then the next year everybody reacted, right? I mean, as an artist, this is really what you want. You want everybody to react it, right? But there will be a deliberate disconnect because they are forcing a disconnect if you do not allow the younger people to build on what's already there, right? I think, and
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am Warren was make that point all the time. We're doing nothing. We just building on what's already there, right? So
Yeah.
you respect
Yeah.
what's gone before, and you add your own thing to it, and you move
And yeah,
on,
I didn't think, of course. Of course.
right? Um, so if everybody goes to the same, let's say 5 writers, right, for this song. Last year, the last competition, they introduced a rule that one writer couldn't have more than five
Yeah,
songs in.
yeah.
But like one writer should only have one song in the competition because it's supposed to be I'm not saying that true. There's also the controversy. A true Calypsonian must write his or her
Yeah.
own music. But let me leaving Sparrow out. What? Because Sparrow wrote his own, but Sparrow didn't always sing his own. People wrote for Sparrow,
Yeah,
right?
that's a
Some
fact. Yeah.
his most famous songs were written for him. Some of them, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that should be a hallmark. So of course they get down on the soca artist because the soca artist might not write his own song. They might have someone write it for him and he's singing it, but that is a talent. Being able to translate someone else's writing to make it sound like yours. People can't do that.
Yeah, but I
If I
mean,
read,
yeah.
you know,
The
that's
industry the industry in the States, I mean, that's how it's structured. They're writers
they
and they're
have the
singers.
structure,
And they find a
right?
song and they decide which voice goes on that song.
Yeah.
That's the
So
business, you know?
I still remember when I was shocked when I realized Michael Jackson didn't write all his own songs. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that-
what do you mean?
yeah, that-
But the way he sang it, you would assume he wrote it
yeah.
because it sounded like it
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
from. So that's a
Yeah.
talent. The structure they write into with soca is younger, it's different, it's pulling from a more international idea, right? And but that's fine. Soca, I mean, Calypso has always done that. Why are we stopping now? And that to me is that's the conflict there. That's why Calypso struggles,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
But
Because
tell me, I mean, in closing, how do we communicate this? Both you and I will let that be our closing comments. How do we communicate this thing about adoption and the fact, how do we communicate that? And also what you just said, Doc, about the fact that young people are going to feed off of what is around them and they have their own statements to make at a point in time. And I think those points have to be raised and raised, really strongly. Even the judges, the point I made a while ago about the judges, part of the problem too is some of the judges. I'm sorry I have to say it so openly, because they're still in another land space and they're not moving.
That is not part of the problem,
You know.
That is a huge chunk of the problem because Calypso is powered by competition. And as long as the competition judges funeral dirges as the thing to do, that is what you're going to get, right? And another thing that used to happen that we have to now, forced to happen, is a kind of casual mentorship. Because when I was creating, although I come in with a youthful energy, I had people around me in the studio who had knowledge of what went before, who could have bring in that. So yes, and kind of guide my youthful energy. Because a computer now is a studio, there's not necessarily that kind of informal mentorship. So now we have to kind of force that so that it happens, so that these young people coming with the energy and the youthfulness also have a grounding that they could then build this newness on top of. And so that disparity is what causing the Caribbean, what you call it, Doc? That new kind of...
I call it Caribbean pop.
Caribbean pop.
Caribbean pop sound. What used to happen is that a Leston might have worked with Pelham and a Kenny might have worked with Leston, and all of them coming out of studio and a thing. So they have this old thing, but they come out with no young energy, same kind of thing. We don't have that now. A producer will sit down with his program in front of him and learn everything off of YouTube without the benefit of what might be a particular Trini style of doing things. And so we have to kind of bridge that gap now, where we kind of bring together these new producers, new artists, with people who have an experience, not necessarily to bring that experience for them to emulate exactly, but for them to have a foundation upon which to build, so that this new sound now isn't just coming out of thin air, and that should help.
Got you. Doc, your closing comments.
I would say part of the problem is that we don't differentiate between culture and tradition. There's a difference. Tradition is the manifestation of culture, and traditions will rise and fall based on what the culture needs to express at that moment. And that's what we're not letting go. So we're trying to hold on to our tradition and not respond to what the culture needs. So that's part of the conversation. Culture still needs adoption. All right. It still needs however that adoption comes. I'm telling you, if EDM have adoption in it, you will hear EDM on the street for Carnival. Because it's the adoption we're looking for.
Right.
And so it's to really have an open discussion and grasp that what we're doing. And I wanted to say, Omari, as we wrapping up, you see that how you call yourself an artist? People need to recognize what an artist is or an artist is. We're not just, as you explained, you're not just doing a thing because it will be popular. You're doing it with thought. There's a message, there's an idea, there's a consciousness that you want to bring out of that. And I think that's something we need to stress and infuse in the young in their heads as they're producing, as they're making. You're not just making a thing, you're an artist, you're doing it for a reason. Find out what your reason is and stick to that and go.
Nice. Boy, I tell you, this was such an engaging, a beautiful, beautiful conversation. Very enlightening, very informative. I don't want to tell you all how Dr. Keela Francis ended up here, but I'm glad that she ended up here. I tell you, I am so glad. No, don't worry, Doc. It was a very good experience. So all week.
I'm going to share the story myself because I play fast. I have no problem in saying I play fast.
No, he wasn't playing fast on social media. We don't have what is playing fast. That is what it's all about. And it helps with the network. I mean, now I know who you are, and it means, hey, Omari, we have a resource, right? certainly,
Yeah.
certainly could bounce on it, you know. And so let me thank Dr. Keela Francis for being with us today. Let me thank Omari Ashby. By the way, before we end, you know, as you spoke about really believing in what we have and growth, you know, I had a big surprise in St. Lucia, where in the south of St. Lucia, they have a festival that's country and western and a carnival on the street in Patois. And I was blown. The country and western songs are all in Patois, French. And I was and they're on the streets and they tell me every year it's like an annual carnival. And I mean, I looked at that and I was like, what? Country and western, you know? So, and that's what they've been influenced and they believe in it. And so maybe that's their adoption, but we need to continue with ours. Yeah, so let me thank you a lot, both of you, for being here. It was really, really, really good. And I'm sure our listeners had a great time. Thanks for viewing Lots Drawn. And my guest today, Dr. Keela Francis from the UTT, the Carnival and Masters of Arts and Carnival Studies, and Omari Ashby, my colleague at UWI. Thank you very much.